Hey everyone, we got a crazy McDizzle gaming exclusive here. Numerous former Firewalk Studio employees took some time to talk with me around the biggest video game financial blunder of all time, Concord, which lost Sony anywhere from $200 to $400 million and cost about 200 people their jobs. What they told me was insane. These employees do want to remain anonymous, but did want to get a bit of their story out there. They didn't like seeing misinformation around the ground level employees when they have intimate knowledge of what actually happened during the development of Concord. The least I can do is get those details and that perspective out there. And that's what we're going over today. If you enjoy my investigation videos like this or a recent series on Ember by Grums, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe if you're new. Lots of games fail, but not to the size and scope of something like Concord. And the majority of these employees were extremely experienced in the first-person shooter space. It was a AAA game attracting AAA talent, and it paid AAA money. People with years of experience working on Destiny 2, Halo, Apex, stripping away the narrative stuff and the visual character design. The actual FPS, the gameplay itself, was received okay. With the information they have now, it's actually somewhat of a miracle that they put that together in such a short time frame that they actually were in production. We'll talk more about that though. Even small details like reload animations were amazing, to be honest. And we talk about that at a granular level just to show the technical powers that the team actually did have. One big misconception out there is that the game was in development for 8 years. Maybe 8 years ago the idea was on a napkin somewhere, but the team actually just started ramping up during the pandemic. The bulk of Concord's development starting in 2021. Some history on Firewalk Studios. Firewalk Studios was established in 2018 as a subsidiary of Probably Monsters. This was created by veterans of game companies such as Bungie and Activision, including former Activision executive Tony Hsu and former Bungie creative director Ryan Ellis. Let's keep Ryan's name in mind. Sony announced a partnership with Firewalk Studios in 2021, and in April 2023, Sony announced the acquisition of Firewalk Studios from Probably Monsters. Now, we can only speculate to who made a lot of money on this. I would expect the investors with Probably Monsters made a lot. Perhaps Ryan Ellis made quite a bit of money too, that I'm not sure of. So we've talked a little background about Concord and Firewalk Studios. Let's talk about the people that are ultimately responsible for the outcomes. Now, I totally understand you win as a team, you lose as a team, but some people and organizations get paid a whole lot more to own the results if you win as a team. And publicly have not really seen much of the blame. What I understand from my sources, between the executives and leadership team, where it's their job to set a culture for the studio, there really wasn't a healthy one around feedback. A lot of it was about executing on the leader's vision. As we talked about earlier, the talent making the game at Firewalk Studios was exceptionally talented and exceptionally experienced. There was a stark contrast with that level of experience with the director of IP, Kimberly Cranes. Kimberly's previous experience for 4.5 years was working for Wizards of the Coast, being a narrative lead and a world builder for Magic the Gathering. Although I suspect there's a lot of transferable skills there towards world building, it's a far cry from being thrust into the role of director of IP for a brand new AAA game IP. I mean, there's millions and millions of dollars on the line here. I find it bizarre when you're making a game not to have that 100% focus on, well, making the game. That's what's really gonna hook people. She started with the company at the end of 2021 as a senior world builder. We can see from this interview with the Washington Post, which happened roughly a month after she started with Firewalk Studios, about how she spends the majority of her day. Her answer was, the best way that she could describe world building is that she literally gets to play God. She gets to create a new world, gets to decide what goes in it, get to decide what it's like, and gets to decide who lives there. Of course, all with the collaboration and approval from the rest of the incredible team designing the game. Well, you know what they say about boxing with God? Your arms just aren't long enough. Within a few months, she was promoted to narrative design lead, and by November of 2022, she was promoted to director of IP. An IP for a game that doesn't exist yet. There were significant concerns around the leadership of Kim or the lack of leadership skills and experience. But the culture of the studio made it hard to address, and we'll talk more about that. One thing Kim started driving was a significant narrative focus and a significant amount of resources poured into that narrative focus, which is odd for a multiplayer game. This was supposed to be a dev-first studio, however, so many of the things seemed outside of the scope of the actual gameplay. Sources have told me that if they knew there was going to be that much focus, they may have had more questions upon hire, or even have walked away. These included expensive vignettes, which may have been the plan the whole time, but what was not the plan were the reshoots. Remember, there's a finite amount of resources at this studio, and there were thoughts like, why are we spending so much time on the Galactic Guide? Which was a major project for Kimberly. Not that the Galactic Guide was a bad thing, but people that I've talked to said that the priority should have been a good game. Add that stuff later. We can almost draw some parallels between this and Red 5 Studios. With Mark Kern at the helm, there was focus on things that didn't really have to do with the game that wasn't even out yet. Like the infamous Firewalk bus, or a studio that made rap videos that had nothing to do with the game. With Concord, it was these deep narrative elements, all of the reshoots, an anime which still has some unreleased episodes, the weekly videos, a huge amount of focus with things that may have not had to do with the game in some cases, or B, didn't resonate with gamers if it was part of the game. The trailer came out and it was an incredibly high quality trailer. It was almost 5 minutes long, and just think of the massive amount of mocap and cost to make this narrative trailer that didn't really tell us a whole lot about the game that people would have been interested in, which is the PvP, the FPS elements, what makes it different. The dialogue, the character design, they were all mocked. Let's hear from Kim about her reaction to people's reaction to the trailer.
To play the game, and the chance to speak to Kim Crines, Concord Director of IP, and John Wisniewski, lead character designer on the game, about Concord's plans for the future, the gameplay philosophy, and that controversial trailer.
Yeah, that trailer, that moment is such a tiny slice of everything that we've been working on for years and years and years. We're excited for the game and for the IP to be, the game to be in people's hands, the IP to be in people's minds. I think I'm personally very excited for the IP for folks to delve into the Galactic Guide if that is something they choose to do. For these vignettes to come out on a weekly basis, you'll start to fall in love with the depth of the characters. That's something that you learn week to week. That's their personalities will unfold, their relationships will unfold for you, their backstories. None of that is something you can get in a tiny little slice of it. But that's a start. There's something there. So I'm glad folks watched it. I'm glad they participated, and I can't wait for them to see more, to see everything that is there.
This would have been such a great opportunity to say, hey, we're listening to gamers' feedback, we'll take it into account. But we're talking about an IP when we should be talking about the game. It's kind of sad to hear now. Telling people that they're going to fall in love with the characters probably wasn't a great move. The trailer itself was probably very expensive, incredibly high quality. All the characters are motion captured. Remember all those expensive reshoots? Now, in watching the trailer, I cringe. It's like Marvel-style dialogue. It's cheesy. I say Marvel-style dialogue, but Rivals is doing great. And I do think if there was less of a narrative focus on the game and more of a focus on the gameplay itself, these people could have made something even more special than what they made. I don't want to dismiss their hard work. And I do think there was a world with resonating characters and a resonating narrative that could have been effective, and Concord could have been somewhat successful. But we got characters and a whole lot of lore that nobody cared about. In fact, I think it detracted from the game itself because people that actually got hands-on with the game said, hey, it's alright, nothing super special, but a lot of games like that aren't when they start out. And the bones of a decent PvP game put together in just about 3 years. We can tell by this, Kimberly's in a position over her head. And my sources have indicated that, at least in their opinion, it was a big mistake to appropriate so much of the funding and so much of the time to the narrative side of the game versus the game itself. Some of the feedback I received that she was not very empathetic and definitely ambitious. But the lack of experience definitely showed, so did the results. How does a studio who's built itself around hiring the best and top talent end up in a position like this? This next one brings up interesting questions about professional ethics in game development. One thing I will share is that there were significant rumors of a relationship between Ryan Ellis and Kimberly. Ryan's wife worked at another studio, had a lot of friends, and I guess things got around. A lot of the team knew, and it made for a weird vibe. Was I there? No, but this is being told to me by reputable people on the inside. Now, people's in-office relationships are their own business, but if you're someone who's not experienced at the job, or things go really far south, people start to have some questions. And how can the game director objectively give feedback to someone he may be in a relationship with? That piece is on him for creating that situation. if that's what happened. It does bring up some ethical questions about the management structure around Firewalk, though, that is for sure. I do wonder if Sony had any questions about this. Perhaps they had faith in Ryan's decision-making. One thing I found interesting is Sony did a post-mortem on Concord, and they said one of the lessons learned was more internal testing. That was something that the teams asked for, but more and more was tied up into that narrative funding. I may be wrong in this, but this dude might have gotten rich selling the studio to Sony in 2023. And perhaps his judgment was a little clouded. The people that I've talked to don't wish anything bad for Kim and Ryan, but they do want their story out there, and they can't be the ones to tell it. And again, it's just not all on those two folks. However, them, the CEO Tony, the studio team director Sean, and people in those peripherals made it a really challenging workplace. And when I say challenging to make a really great game, for the most part, people seem to like working there. Although they took risks, those risks cost 170 to 200 people their jobs. Now, a number of Concord employees are getting a lot of attention on YouTube videos, which I find crazy considering what I know now. Mainly from identity politics obsessed YouTuber Smash JT, who in between his time being sued for harassment, is making videos about individual contributor Firewalk employees, while really not asking the difficult questions about management and leadership. And he also appears to be wrong. For example, Smash made a video accusing this developer known as Prof Brown of making everybody call them the professor. Well, let's talk about that. The people that I talked to within Firewalk Studios have not ever heard of Prof referred to as Professor, let alone forcing everybody to call them the Professor. Nor did they play a pivotal role in destroying Firewalk Studios as Smash JT infers. And I can say Prof is not one of my sources. What is true is that Prof Brown was named Lisa Brown and changed their name to Prof. Not Professor? A little weird, whatever. To the insiders I talked to, they were introduced as Prof to everybody. And people were just focused on a job, they weren't focused on somebody's name. Nor in talking to multiple people from Firewalk Studios were they known as an HR nightmare. Like the rest of the development team, they were very experienced working with Sunset Overdrive, the Resistance series, Destiny 2. Prof Brown was a principal gameplay designer. They worked on character design, but not as you think. Not as the visual design of the character, but designing how the character is played. They made big decisions in how characters felt when they were actually played and so forth. And by all accounts, they did a good job with that piece. They were still many levels removed from directors and Ryan and Kim. They didn't have their own team, but they led various projects and initiatives with people. Smash has targeted a number of ground level employees, trying to frame it as they are the reason why Concord has failed. An example of what Smash is doing, and what really kicked off my investigation, is making pretty arrogant videos about this person just looking for work. Just like all the other Firewalk employees.
Just when you think people are starting to learn their lessons and figure out where they belong in this world, you realize, no, at the end of the day, people always fall back to what they know, tried and true. And when it comes to the Concord lead developer, originally from Firewalk Studios, the professor decides she's back.
Everyone has a right to seek work and prove their merits. And Smash is very off on his assessment of their contributions to Concord. I can't imagine why he has harassment lawsuits. Here's an example of Smash being really far off the mark. When one of the developers from Concord flagged the exact same things that we're talking about today, Smash JT mocked them as well as did a fantastic job of bootlicking Firewalk's management.
Right now. And she starts it off with, I was going to DM you after seeing this, but the site makes me pay to do that. So at the risk of getting dogpiled, I'm just going to say this here. A lot affected the art side of Concord, including design by committee, failure of some leadership to listen to the art team, etc. So already, right off the bat, this is excuses galore. It has nothing to do with me. Look at the executives telling us what to do. It was their fault, guys. It wasn't me. They told me to do all this. I had to, gun to my head. I had to inject the DEI. I really did.
It was right under his nose the whole time, the management, the leadership, but he would rather talk about fiction. I'm highlighting this because my sources felt he was very off the mark. And Smash knows what it's like to go through hard times. I mean, look at this.
And we weren't making any money in our family on my side of things. So I decided to open a Patreon to help with some bills. I was able to monetize my channel back then with advertisements and make a little bit of money per month. But it still wasn't very much. I mean, I live in Southern California and it's extremely expensive here. So my wife, a single income family basically as a registered nurse, which is good money, is not enough to support a mortgage, 2 kids in school, and a deadbeat dad like me. And I was like, I need to find a way to make more money. And that's when I actually started driving for Uber and Lyft. And that was one of the lowest points of my life, I'll be honest.
You've had hard times, Smash, but yet you show no empathy. And the amount of harassment that these ground floor employees has gotten has been astounding. Ask tougher questions to your sources and you might actually get down to the truth. And it trickles down. Other creators make videos about it. They don't check to see if anything's true.
The reason why Firewalk Studios was actually shut down instead of being given a chance to continue working on Concord is because an internal investigation revealed that these people, especially Lisa Brown, are not actually capable of producing video games. They are activists and nothing else, pretending and masquerading to be game developers for attention. Now,
I don't see much about activism here. It just seems like someone that is very competent and very experienced. But we can say with a high level of confidence that at least some of what Smash JT has said hasn't been true. Now, Sony did do an internal investigation. What came from that investigation was that they wanted to do additional user testing or internal evaluation, and the timing of such user testing or internal evaluation. They should have done those much earlier was a result of that internal investigation. That is something that developers wanted early on, but the focus was on the narrative. Myself, not working in the game industry, looking at this from the outside, it all sounds so backwards. I know one person that worked on Concord called gamers talentless freaks. I asked for my source's perspective on that, and they didn't think they should be calling people that, but they totally understand why someone would lash out when you're just getting shouted at online around this. I did ask the question if there was a lot of denial in the studio that the game would be a failure. And they said it was a bit tough to answer, but one thing for sure that there was a lot of denial in the studio on calling it a failure. Like even in the last post that Firewalk Studios put out, they would not call it a failure. And the source gets the need to be positive and lift the team up, but you can do that while still admitting some truths. It's okay to say that they were part of one of the biggest failures in history. It's clear from my discussions with some of the folks from the team that they wish they could have done some things different, approached leadership a different way, somehow got to a different outcome. That's some serious self-reflection and I'm sure they grew a lot from it. As well as consider the fact that the game director may have been in a relationship with someone who was not qualified to be in the job. In fact, it's likely that job shouldn't have existed at that point in development. A big villain in all of this, of course, is Sony as well. Sony essentially paid hundreds of millions of dollars to train a whole bunch of people to work at other AAA studios. At the end of the day, Concord will go down as a massive blunder. And I hope the ex-employees can take that experience to their next job and rock it. And we'll keep asking tough questions of executives and management. I do think on top of being a crowded market for a hero shooter, especially for one that costs money, the project was doomed with the disproportionate narrative focus. I don't think there was a way around that. But it does beg the question, if more of those narrative resources were put into the gameplay, would the result have been different? If the narrative was good, if the characters were interesting and engaging, would that have changed the story? Love to know your thoughts in the comments. But the ground level employees don't deserve to get dragged through the mud for this, but some really rich people do. Thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next video.